Matthew chapter 11, please stand as we meet our Savior in his word. At that time, Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and learned and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for this is what you were pleased to do. All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. The next slide, please. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. The gospel of the Lord. Praise be to you, O Christ. You may be seated. First, some context, and then we'll kind of be able to dig into the two sections of our reading. So far, as we've been launching into the Gospel of Matthew, we've been seeing Jesus teach us about the kingdom. Of the first four books of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Matthew is the most political, we've been saying. But political not in terms of Jesus wanting to get votes or power or prestige or control an economy or the world stage. No, he is only cared about eternal politics, which means your soul and where you last forever. And so he talks in an entirely paradoxical manner to the way of this world. The world has a certain way of talking about things. Even we in our own relationships talk about things that matter for the temporary and for the relational and for our own personal economy and our own household, the future of our children, etc. But all of that revolves in the atmosphere of this world. And when Jesus speaks, he is talking about something that blows that atmosphere apart. He's talking about eternity. A lasting existence where we would have with God not only an identity now, but something that lasts forever, that will never be taken and can never disappoint and will never be removed or watered down. And so, Jesus then is going against the paradigms of this world, and so the world does not act like a little toddler that goes towards mom and says, oh, this is so wonderful. I can't wait to embrace all of these things you give us. The world is actually like the flip side of that toddler, kicking and screaming and resisting and doing all the things that sometimes not only toddlers but teens will do when they don't necessarily like the world that has been given to them. And that might be a petty example, unless it's not. See, in Matthew chapter 9, where we first started, Jesus calls Matthew, and he already starts teaching us that this kingdom of God is upside down compared to what we might think. Jesus doesn't call the most noble, the most worthy, the most spiritually pure, and the most morally upright people. He calls a tax collector, a low-down, dirty, rotten, backstabbing, cheating, stealing turncoat who was robbing his own fellow countrymen. And Jesus forgives a man like that and calls him to purpose. And it leads us to say, when I look in the mirror, Jesus calls people like Matthew, thanks be to God, because he also calls people like this. And people like this. Because it's about his grace. He doesn't call those who are worthy. He calls those who are not and makes them what they otherwise couldn't be. And then when Jesus starts opening his mouth after he calls the disciples and he tells them more what this kingdom is like, into Matthew chapter 10, what we've seen is that Jesus is telling us that this world is not going to go idly into the night. It's going to go kicking and screaming. It means that there are going to be challenges in this life, and we even see them now. When we wrestle with some of the things that God says, we wrestle because what this world says is not only opposite, it is antagonistic towards what Jesus says. And so then that gets to things like not just our relationships, but it gets to things like our hearts and our minds, and it puts a burden on us. So after Jesus does this, he calls his disciples, he prepares them, he says this is going to be challenging. This is no cupcake walk. This is not going to be easy, buddies. And then he sends them out, and after he sends them out, what you start to see towards the end of chapter 10 and then into 11, especially the beginning of 11, is, and we didn't get to cover those in detail, but I'll cover them quickly here, the beginning of the pushback. First of all, it starts with John the Baptizer, who's in prison because he's proclaiming God's truth. He's going to be beheaded soon, but he still doubts, is Jesus the Messiah? Because there were a lot of pretenders, so even John the Baptizer's struggling a bit. He's human, just like us. And then there are other people who don't necessarily like what Jesus is saying. They're the religious elite. And they're questioning, Jesus, how can you say that you're God's son? Which we'll get to in a moment. And then what's going to happen as we see more and more is Jesus has plenty of teaching. Why? In order to communicate to us that this world is not always going to like it, but we have to ask ourselves, we have a burden no matter what, a burden with all the things that we carry, independent of God, so we think. The burdens that we carry in this world, in our life, in our hearts, and our souls, we have a burden no matter what. So really the question is, are you going to carry that on your own, or do you recognize that Jesus has something far greater to offer? And that's where the end of chapter 11 takes us. To paint a picture for this, I'd like to tell you a quick story. About 2 weeks ago, I took my 3 boys, and we went on the most exciting trip of the summer. I'm smiling there like, when Dad says most exciting trip. It's not. But that's like part of being a dad, right? You just smile and say it's going to be fun even if it's not. We went on an overnight backpacking trip way up on the Continental Divide, like 5+ miles one way. It was awesome. You're not laughing as much as they are not laughing either. Some of that sarcasm, it was fun, but when you start at like 9,500 feet, you get to about 12,500, and then we kind of pop down into this basin where we camped for the night. And then we didn't necessarily have all of the equipment, but we had enough equipment too, and it's all going to work out. It's all going to be fun and fine. And it was fun and fine, right? Like, don't look at them. Right? So there's backpacks, and there's sleeping bags, and there's tents and things like that. And it was we had enough equipment, and it was fine. But there was one time where there was a specific backpack that would no longer stay connected, and it just became a burden. And so then one of the boys was going to carry it, and it's like, you got this. You're fine. And after like mile 2, he was fine. And then we got to like mile 3. And then you start to get some of those inclines where they first have their first experience, their introduction with elevation, like hiking in elevation, which is everyone's joy, right? And then you get to about mile 4, and then they were like the backpack changed hands a couple times. And it's just a backpack. It wasn't one of those like weight efficient backpacks either, like that fits into this. It was like kind of like big and bulky. It was just a pain. And so I finally just started carrying it. Does that make it better? You would have thought that I gave my youngest like the biggest relief in the world until like Micah or I could start carrying this. Because it's when you're carrying something for a long time and you're already sucking wind, any little bit of weight just kind of starts to get to you after a while. Is that not illustrative of our entire lives? So I have a question. An overarching question for today. And it's something that you've already been wrestling with. What kind of weight have you been carrying around lately? What kind of weight have you been carrying around from your job that you never seem to do enough, and maybe the people around you aren't supporting you or appreciating you, or maybe it's just the burden of success and achievement and it's kind of catching up, and it feels like everything is clipping your heels and you never can quite get ahead? What about in your relationships at home? Is it that husband and wife haven't necessarily been on the same page? Is it that mom and dad feel like they're constantly maybe at odds with each other or can't really check all the boxes with their kids? Is it that you as a parent also have mom or dad guilt, which is a burden in and of itself that you kind of sign up for, and then you think you can kind of get over some of it, but it's like it's a shapeshifter, and so it just morphs and it becomes a different thing at a different season in life. And as your kids grow, there's just different challenges. And as you grow, you start to learn more and you become more wise, which means also you carry more burdens. And then you worry about your kids, and it's not just the future, but it's the expectations of now. And then you look at their mind and where they are with their physical health, and then you look and you see that there's a soul. Can you tell that I've been down this road just as you have been? And then you get older and you become a grandparent, and I'm not a grandparent, but what I've been told by thousands of grandparents is that it's not that goes away, it just changes. As you look at your kids, and then you look at your grandkids, and then you start to think more generationally. Or what kind of weight have you been carrying around as you look at our world? We look at things like the World Cup or the 250th celebration of our nation, and we think of all sorts of things on the world stage and how God hasn't guaranteed, as we said last week, that this is going to continue the way it is now. So we're grateful for what we have, we're prayerful for what God would provide, and we're hopeful even, but, and then you get to yourself, just you, yourself, and you. The burdens you get to carry around as you think of where you stand before God, the places you thought you would be, the weaknesses you had hoped you would have overcome by now, and the knowledge you would have expected would have gotten you so far, and you just think to yourself, you never quite arrive. It's almost like what a false summit is. Do you know what a false summit is? You ever hiked and you experienced a false summit, and you're like, there it is. And then you get to the thing that's there, but it's just that false summit because it's actually hiding the real summit. That's actually the next thing. And that's life, isn't it? We think we're going to, by our own thinking, choosing, striving, accomplishing, deriving, deciding, we're going to get there, and whatever there is. And then we just realize we were just building up expectations and hopes that led to disappointment and not to the reality. So when I put it that way, what kind of burdens have you been carrying? If you haven't thought about that in a while, which I find that hard to believe because it's impossible, but even if you haven't thought about that for a while, I'll welcome this thought exercise that runs in parallel. And it is that if you were to ask the 10 people closest to you who know you best what they think you struggle with, do you think you'd like that conversation? So even if you maybe lacked a little bit of self-awareness, which I don't think any of us do, maybe just to rip the cover off a little bit more, I could say, even if we had that conversation, if we didn't already feel the burden, that for sure would do it, would it not? So what does God want from us? Does God want from us to feel like we have a 10, 25, 45, 200-pound weight on our back, on our soul, so that as we're trudging through life, all we would do is feel the weight? Regardless of what you think, the world in and of itself only presents burdens. You cannot tell me one place where yeah, we go here in the world and all we find is rest. As we said at the beginning, the world's only solutions is you can ignore the inner voice which tells you you have a problem, or you can experience the world's shame and cancellation when you don't match up with the world's paradigms. So the world doesn't have a solution for the burdens that we have. So the question is, what are you going to do with them? You can't say you don't have them. Remember, ask 10 people closest to you. No one wants that. Why? Because we all have them. We knew that anyways. So the question is not, well, let's just pretend like we don't have any. You have your burdens already. The real question is, when it comes to the carrying of the burdens that we have, some of them are similar, and some of them are unique only to each of us. Like the burdens that you carry might be similar to me, and the burdens that you carry might be similar to me. But there's plenty of them that are totally unique to you. So nobody can be like, oh, I totally understand. No. So when carrying our burdens, which we are and will continue to do, we have two options. The world doesn't have an option for us. Not a real one, not a solution. So our solution really comes up to this. It's you in the world, or it's Jesus. And what Jesus wants, as his own followers are experiencing pushback, is he wants us to overhear what he has to say in the face of resistance to his followers then and to us, so we would have something better, not only with our knowledge, but also with our soul rest. So what did Jesus say? Remember at the beginning when he was talking, he said, I and the Father are one. If you know me, you know the Father. What is he doing there? There's some people that would like to say that Jesus never really comes out and says he's the Son of God. People who say that are doing one of two things. They either have a total religious agenda and they're trying to drive it, although it's as empty as a balloon, or they've never really read the Bible. Because this is one of those instances where Jesus is using language that is so closely and intrinsically connected to the entire identity, Old Testament identity of who God is, that it's inescapable. There's a reason why we use also Exodus 33. Moses says, I want to know you and I want to see you, and no one can see God and live. And God uses this name, the capital L-O-R-D, which means he keeps all of his promises. And he says, this is what you are going to do. And then here comes Jesus, 1,500 years after the time of Moses, and he says, it's me. No one knows the Father like I do. He and I are one. You want to know him? You know me. So, and think about this. Who can see God and live? Moses wanted to see God, and that seems like a good idea, right? Wouldn't you love if God would just show up and be like, poof, here I am. Except that when you think more of what God is like, his perfect holiness, justice, and righteousness, do we think we could stand before him and last? That's what he said to Moses. No, we couldn't. It's like in the morning, or maybe we would even say during this hot streak we're going to have, go outside when it's clear and you have just the sun, and I want you to think about this for a moment. How long would my eyeballs last if I stood there wide-eyed and stared at the sun? Not advisable, don't do it. But of course, we wouldn't be able to do that. The sun is but a blip compared to the holiness and the righteousness of God. So we can't see him and live. Moses wanted to, and so God hid him in a cleft in the rock and passed by and allowed him to see the wake of the boat, so to speak, the afterglow, to get a glimpse of what it was like. Not so that Moses would rely on what he saw, but so that he would rely on what he heard. And what did we hear? God said, I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. And then 1,500 years later, his mercy was embodied in a way that we can see, that we can actually grow close to, and that we're not afraid of. You cannot see God, not in his full glory, but what if he hides his glory in a perceptible manner by taking on human flesh? Now we're talking. And now you get a glimpse not only into the glory of God, but also how God works. God's glory is not this big showy production so that we're just awestruck. No, it would actually be awfully terrifying. But instead, we get to see the glory of God as he hides himself, putting on the veil of human flesh. And when you see Jesus, now you know what God is like. And what is God like? He is a God who has the highest of standards, and yet he will also communicate his compassion and mercy through his Son, who will keep them for you. Remember who's speaking here. This is Jesus, who is not giving you standards that you will hopefully live up to, and if you don't, you're shamed and canceled. This is Jesus who still retains God's standards, but fulfills every single one of them for you. This is Jesus who says, you want to see what the Father is like? You want to know if I'm from the Father? Guess what? The only way you can know the Father is if you actually, for once in your life, prove that you deserve to be one of God's daughters and sons and shape up. No, he doesn't say that. You want to see what God is like? He didn't say look more at yourself. That just presents more of the burden. He also doesn't say your knowledge that you attain from all that you think you might know about God from philosophy and podcasts and listening and scriptures, and you could have a triple or quadruple PhD in theology, and then you'll, no. Your knowledge doesn't lead you to be so puffed up and smart or reliant upon yourself. Your knowledge actually must lead to relationship. You want to know God? It's through Jesus. You see, you have to carry the weight of what you know or don't know about God no matter what anyways. Everybody's doing that. I've never talked to a soul, and I've talked to thousands. I've never talked to a soul who, when they start talking about God, just think it's like not a big deal. Like when they actually start considering it. And they want to know more, not just because it's like, oh, because I just want to kind of check an intellectual box. No. Because it actually has to do with your relationship with God. The more you know about God, the more you know about who God is, not against you at all, but who God is for you. And so what does Jesus say? You want to see the Father? It's through him. Not with expectation or fear or dread or guilt or shame, worry about punishment, but so that the knowledge that you have of God through Jesus, the ultimate Moses, the greater law keeper, the perfect one in your place, the sacrifice on the cross, and the risen one from the grave, who's but the first fruits of what God has in store for you. It's through Jesus that he, the Father, has a relationship with you. Knowledge in and of yourself, that's a burden. But knowledge that leads to relationship, burden is lifted in Jesus. So that's where Jesus goes next. Well, even before we get to where he goes next, notice what he says about the little ones. He says, isn't that also true for these little ones he mentions? And he uses this word, which doesn't just mean little ones as though like they're kind of like competing with your height a little bit as adults. I mean, they're still little ones. He uses this word, napioi, which means even infants, talking about little children who belong to God. Talk about a burden. I had 2 conversations this week, 3 actually, with parents about this very thing. When you look at your child and you think to yourself, what a burden we have, shaping their hearts and wanting them to grow close to God. And for all the things that we can't control, talk about their soul. We can't control. We have influence. We share. We want to encourage. We want to surround them and help them. But you can't. There's no switch you can flip inside the soul. Can you? And yet God looks at little children and says, these little ones who belong to him, who are precious in his sight, he also wants to bring them into this relationship. Not so much with the knowledge that they have to derive the more they grow, as though they're not smart enough yet, therefore they could never be in God's kingdom. Don't think, they will grow. But don't think that in terms of that now at this little age, they could not have a relationship with God right now. Do not ever think that. Do not ever think that. Because he refers to these little ones already as his very own. In another place, Jesus says, let the little children come to me and don't hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. So how much does God care about what we know? If it leads you to rely more on the world and on yourself, that will only be a burden upon you that you have to fix. But if what you know ultimately is just mostly about the relationship that you're growing in with God, then that is not a burden at all. That burden becomes light. Which is why then he goes to where he goes next. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. What is the burden you are carrying that has made your life feel like you're at about 11,000 feet and you're going uphill and you've had about enough of the burdens on not just your back, but your soul? It's that relationship, it's that weakness, it's that guilt, it's that frustration, it's that concern, and for the life of you, you just can't throw it off your soul. God, I cannot say this more clearly, God did not make you to carry that weight. It is the same as if I took 200 pounds and expected one of those children to push press 200 pounds this morning. That would be ridiculous and unhealthy, to say the least. Well, let's say we got a squat rack out and we put 1,000 pounds on the squat rack. There's not a single one of us who are like Eddie Hall or one of those world's strongest men who could get under there and push press that either. We're not made for that. Well, consider the greatest weight that you're carrying right now. God has not made you to carry that on your own. And if you haven't figured that out, you will someday on your own. Instead, he invites you to take all of that weight and to consider the great eternal weight that he has already carried and removed for you. The weight of your sin and the weight of death. The consequence of all of your guilt and all shame combined was already paid for as it was put on Jesus, and God pressed that weight on him so he would never push it on you. And since that's not your burden to carry, then Jesus rightly says to you, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. What kind of rest? Greater than a good night's sleep, greater than vacation rest. This is rest for your souls that lasts forever. And when you have that kind of a rest, that teaches, equips, and prepares you to do something with all of these other temporary burdens that you carry too. Jesus walks with you and carries that burden of relationship hurt. He walks with you and he carries that burden of frustration about work, concern about your kids, never feeling like you're enough, the struggles from the past, the fears from the future. If he was already nailed to the cross, if he already breathed his last, and he walked out of that tomb and embraces you, then all of the burdens that we think we might carry, as long as we have Jesus, are only light. God grant that to us all. Amen.